turn to Jason.
After the event. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for a little bit late start. Let's just settle down. We were waiting on a couple of folks to join us. Welcome everyone. My name is Rahul Pathak. I direct the Howard J. Samuels State and City Policy Center here at the Baruch College, and I also serve on the faculty of the Marxist School. On behalf of the center and school, I would like to welcome all of you for this very timely and important conversation on reforming social services in New York City. I'm very happy that all of you took time. Some of you have end of semester commitments. We are just wrapping up our semester here at Baruch. This is the last week of classes, so all of you could come in and join us. I'll do a detailed introduction in a little bit of all the panelists, but I would especially like to welcome Mr. Steve Banks and Mr. Robert Doerr, both of whom have been former HRA commissioners, and Mr. Jason Turner, who has also been a former HRA commissioner. So we have actually 3 HRA commissioners in the room today. We also welcome Professor Joseph Vitretti, who is from Hunter College, and Tom Main, of course, and both of these guys have been thinking about New York City social policy for decades now. That's not a joke of age or anything. So now I would also like to thank the Dean of the Marxist School of Public and International Affairs, Dean Sherry Ryan, and she has taken the time to be with us today. So I would like to just invite her to say a few words to welcome you all.
Thank you, Rahul, and thank you all so much for joining us here this evening. Not only is it the end of the semester, but it's freezing out, so we really appreciate all of you making the effort to get here to join us for this very important discussion on social services delivery and urban welfare policy in New York City. As Rahul said, my name is Sherry Ryan. I have the pleasure of serving as the Dean of the Marx School of Public and International Affairs, and we are so happy to host this in conjunction with the Samuel State and City Policy Center. So thank you so much, Rahul, for your leadership as the director of that center, and thank you to Dr. Main for this fascinating book, which is the focus of tonight's discussion. I think it's a wonderful example of the kind of community-connected and applied research that our faculty are well known for, and so this is really a shining star in that realm. So his book, Reforming Social Services in New York, examines 6 decades of efforts, sorry, to address poverty, joblessness, and homelessness, just a few prickly issues that we have here in New York City and across the urban areas in the U.S., through the creation and periodic restructuring of the city's Human Resources Administration, which is well represented here in this room, and related social welfare agencies. This topic could not be more timely, as many feel that social safety networks, both locally and globally, are under strain and being scaled back, and we need solutions. So thank you for bringing this discussion to Marx. We're very proud to host this topic this evening and look forward to meeting all of you afterwards. Thanks.
So now I guess I would like all the panelists to come and join us on the stage. We have the names listed there. And now before I move on to introducing the panelists, I wanted to say a few things about the Samuel Center. The Samuel Center was founded in the honor and memory of Howard J. Samuels. Some of you might know him as the Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor of New York, and he served as the Director of Small Business Administration under Lyndon B. Johnson, and as a special advisor to the JFK and Carter administration. The center was relocated actually to Baruch in 2017 and is now particularly focused on advancing research and dialogue on state and local governance issues with a little bit more focus on New York. The center supports researchers and doctoral students through fellowship programs and is expanding its footprint in terms of research and outreach. So we would like to stay in touch with all of you. What we'll do is all of you did RSVP for the event, so we'll just add you to our mailing list so that we can stay engaged with you in the future. Now, we have four terrific panelists here. I'll start from the right. Our first panelist, Steve Banks, served as the Commissioner of New York City Social Services Department during the de Blasio administration. Before then, he had a distinguished career of more than 40 years as a public interest and social justice attorney. Among his many accomplishments, he was the director of the McCain litigation that established a right to shelter for homeless families in New York City that some of you might have heard. It was quite in news when there was an influx of asylum seekers in New York City between 2022 and 2024. Mr. Banks has also been the head of the Legal Aid Society and has been profiled twice by the New York Times. And in 2024, he was named as a trailblazer in law by the city and state New York. So thanks, Steve, for being here. Second panelist is Mr. Robert Doerr, a native New Yorker, grew up in Brooklyn. He's the current president and the 12th president of American Enterprise Institute, leading one of the nation's oldest and most respected public policy think tanks that was actually founded in New York City in 1938. Before he joined AEI in 2014, he spent more than 20 years in New York City's social policy space. He was the commissioner of New York City's Human Resource Administration during Bloomberg administration. He was also the commissioner of New York State Office of Temporary Disability and Assistance, and now he continues related work at AEI. And he has served as the co-chair of the National Commission of Hunger and as a lead member of the AEI Brookings Working Group on Poverty and Opportunity. So we are really delighted to have you here, Robert, and thanks for traveling from DC. Joseph Vitreti is our moderator for today. He is the Thomas Hunter Professor of Public Policy at Hunter College, where he was chair of the Urban Policy and Planning Department from 2008 to 2023. Professor Vitreti has published 12 books and numerous articles in scholarly journals, law reviews, and popular media. He has written almost on every New York City mayor since LaGuardia, including books on John Lindsay and de Blasio. His most recent book is Radical Dreamers, Race, Choice, and the Failure of American Education that was published by the Oxford University Press, I think, just this year. And we had an excellent event at Hunter a couple of months back on that book. And lastly is Professor Thomas Main. You see his photos everywhere. He's a little bit embarrassed about that. He is on our faculty at the Marxist School. He teaches courses on governing New York City, among other courses that he teaches to our students. And he is our in-house expert on everything New York City politics and social policy in particular. Before the book that we are discussing today, he has also authored Homelessness in New York City that was published by the NYU Press. His other recent work focuses on the rise of illiberal political movements and has authored 2 books with the Brookings Press on the rise of alt-right and the rise of illiberalism. So thanks, Tom, again, for being here and willing to be a part of this. So Professor Vitreti will serve as a moderator. We'll have Tom deliver some remarks in the beginning for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll switch over to a panel discussion with our esteemed guest. And towards the end, we'll have time for Q&A. We have a live stream on for this event, so many of you are joining through the live stream, so thank you for that. If you're watching this online, please feel free to enter any of the questions that you might have in the chat, and towards the end, when we do the Q&A, we'll take them one by one as time permits. So I would like to thank everybody again, and over to Professor Vitreti.
Is this on?
I think it is. Yeah. So you just have to press that.
Yes? Okay. Well, welcome again. As was already said, we're here to receive, to welcome, and I guess to celebrate in a way, Tom Main's newest book, Reforming Social Services in New York City. I've had the pleasure of reading it and much of his work. He really is one of the most astute authors on social services in New York City. going back to his work on homelessness and other things. We have about an hour, so my job is to keep things going. And I thought we would start letting Tom say a few words about what brought you to write this book. What do you think are the main things that you would like to see people get out of it? And then we'll give our distinguished panelists an opportunity to chip in.
Well, I just say, oh, here we go. Let me see if we can turn this thing on. What do you do? Maybe I'll get up to the podium. Can you hear me? There we go. Okay. Well, you know, my interest in New York politics goes back to when I talked my way into a job at the Public Interest, and I was trying to figure out what I was. That was, you know, in its day, it was an important political magazine, and I was trying to figure out what am I going to write about, and I noticed that homelessness was an issue that appeared every day in the New York Times, and I called up HRA, right? And amazingly, they were very informative. They gave me a lot of research, and I got to know people there, and I came to the conclusion, gee whiz, these folks who are working in the bowels of New York City's social welfare bureaucracy are good people, and they're doing the best they can, and they're trying to make a difference. And so I developed an affection. Is it crazy to say I have developed an affection for bureaucrats? But anyhow, I did. And then I kept writing on that subject when I went to graduate school, and decided to sort of finally write something like a history of HRA and DSS. And that's it.
And so what are the main points you would like people to draw from this particular book? Why this book?
Well, I would say a couple. I tend to be kind of pro-government, as you might expect. I'm working at the School of Public Affairs. And, you know, one of the things that I find interesting is not necessarily what's the best welfare policy or homeless policy, but how policy is made. And I'm particularly interested in episodes where something like objective information cuts through all the politics and actually brings about a change that has a positive impact on the lives of people who are not terribly well off. And I think I talk about that in my book on the homeless, and that's really the main focus of the book. The subtitle of it is How Major Change happens in urban politics. I didn't dare to put in the term non-incremental change in the subtitle. I thought that was too much of a mouthful. But that's really what the book is about. You know, the argument is, gee whiz, urban politics is not completely mired in stasis, and positive change is possible.
So I'll use the word.
Okay.
So you're studying non-incremental change.
Right.
Why the mayors you chose? There are several mayors you're working on
Yeah.
here. Why each of them?
Well,
Tell
let's
us
see.
why you made those selections.
I mean, my sense was, you know, originally at one point I was thinking about writing a history of HRA. And then I was looking for shortcuts, and I decided, you know what, why not focus on the most striking efforts to make a difference, to make a change at HRA. And so that would be Lindsay, who created HRA. Oh, is this working now? Okay. Now I can
Sit down, stay a
yeah,
while.
Yeah, why not? I get off my bad knee. So I thought, okay, instead of writing about the whole thing, let's write about the formative moments at HRA, efforts to make a big change at HRA. So that has to be Lindsay, right, where HRA comes into existence. And then, not that things weren't important that happened under Koch and Dinkins, but I thought the other big change episode was welfare reform under Giuliani. And then I know I was following the de Blasio administration, and they made this extraordinary decision to bring Stephen Banks in as HRA commissioner, and later Department of Social Services Commissioner. As I describe in the book, when when the announcement of Stephen Banks' nomination was made over TV and people at the HRA commissary heard it, there was a gasp that went up from the audience. And so I figured, okay, this has the makings of another episode that I want to document. And so that's how I focused on those 3 administrations.
And what was it that, what was the difference that allowed these 3 mayors, assuming your thesis, what was it that allowed them to get change that was more than just incremental, to make major changes? What were the circumstances? What was the political environment like? What were their aspirations?
Well, as I say in the book, the most striking, the purest example of non-incremental change, by which I mean not a modification in the baseline policy, but a new policy, okay? So the most striking example of that, I thought, was under Giuliani, where you had this pre-existing expert consensus in favor of work-first welfare. And so, that, by the way, that interests me tremendously, the notion that ideas make a difference in politics, right? And that from the expert consensus comes public ideas, and from the public ideas come policy. That was very interesting. So I think that's why I think of that episode as the purest example of non-incremental change. Lindsay makes a good effort at non-incremental change in a very different sort of way. He is a quintessential progressive. He comes in with a very ambitious agenda, and he creates HRA basically out of nothing, right? So by definition, that's a non-incremental change where you go from nothing to something. The only problem with pointing to Lindsay as a great example of non-incremental change is there for a long time, HRA was not functioning terribly well under Lindsay. So it took a long time to recover. So that's not the ideal episode I'm looking for of non-incremental change. And then there was the extraordinary case history of de Blasio. He came in with, and also I see a lot of continuity, interestingly, between the de Blasio and the Giuliani administrations, if you can believe that, because they both focused on the idea of trying to put welfare clients to work. I thought that was very interesting. The challenge that Steve Banks and de Blasio faced is they didn't come in with a policy idea that had this overwhelming expert consensus behind it. They came in with career pathways, and the key thing that made the change happen was the landslide victory of a political candidate who wins a mandate and then tries to govern on the basis of the mandate. And so I thought that was another very interesting, a different way of trying to bring about non-incremental change.
Okay. Why don't we take this in chronological order, Robert? You were at the helm during the Giuliani years.
Bloomberg.
I'm sorry, during the Bloomberg years.
Why don't you give me the mic? I'm ready to. We're sort of left out in the book.
Okay.
And
go
I
ahead.
couldn't get that to work. But so yes, I was commissioner during Bloomberg,
Right.
and it's worth noting that Giuliani you're right, Tom. It's a great book, and it's a great
Thank
tribute to the workers and experienced civil servants and bureaucrats and really wonderful people of HRA
Yes,
who
yes,
are
yes.
dedicated to making the city work. And I loved being at HRA because of them. And the great thing about the book is it's really a tribute to them. And so I want to compliment you on
Thank
that.
you.
I should point out that Mayor Giuliani was mayor for 8 years. Mayor de Blasio was mayor for 8 years. Mayor Bloomberg was mayor for 12 years.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a lot goes on in those 12 years.
yeah.
And I think that Tom is absolutely right. The fundamental, dramatic change that took place under Mayor Giuliani, partly due to the leadership of Jason Turner and many others, and President Clinton and George Pataki, was dramatic. The city went from income maintenance centers to job centers. They went from entitlement and welfare rights to reciprocal responsibilities. They went from dependency and cash handouts to work requirements and work expectations. And while there were significant changes in the de Blasio administration, they were constrained by that prevailing view that came not only from Washington, the financing of the system was built around that, the expert consensus, and I think a recognition that it had been successful in reducing poverty, child poverty, and it was. And so I think that needs to be recognized. And my favorite, I mean, I read the book very closely and I loved it, except for the fact that you seem to, while you mention me occasionally, you never interviewed me. I would have liked that.
I'm going to apologize for that in a minute,
That's
okay?
all right.
I'll explain.
But my favorite line in the book, there are many favorite lines in the book, I encourage all of the HRA alumni to read it, is on page 75. In fact, even under the kinder and gentler approach of Bill de Blasio and Stephen Banks, I'll leave aside the fact that I think I'm kind of a kind person too, clients were still obligated to participate in work programs. There was a work expectation. There was an engagement expectation that they couldn't change, and I'm not sure they wanted to change. And that is the fundamental change that took place at HRA. The other thing that I think is badly missing is that HRA and HRA's anti-poverty agenda and welfare agenda is about more than just TANF and cash assistance. Under Mayor Bloomberg, we dramatically increased the availability of work supports like SNAP for working people, for public health insurance, which provides an enormous amount of security to people who are working, child care, and we increased the enforcement of child support enforcement, which brought additional dollars, and we created a city EITC. And the idea that lure into work, and that wasn't part of the operation of social services, is a little short-sighted. I mean, I just think it was dramatic. And so I think great change. I think I have to admit, he quotes me several times saying that I suspect there's going to be a great increase in the caseload. And I'll admit, I was a little worried. And I was so gratified, Steve, that it didn't increase because you followed the rules. The other thing is the city changed. The city of New York, between 1992 and 2020, relatively recently, had a 40% reduction in the number of non-marital births in any given year, and an 11% increase in population. And I think after 8 years of Giuliani and 12 years of Bloomberg, it's possible that the people who sought assistance from HRA had understood that the path out of poverty involved a combination of work and public assistance that made work pay more. And I think they responded to that. The book is wonderful in its tribute to the HRA employees, which I greatly appreciate. Little more about the tribute to the New York City residents who complied with these rules, who dealt with them, who went to work, and who I think created better neighborhoods and better environment for their families and their children and their communities and themselves.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
I'd like to ask you a follow-up question. So you said the city changed in terms of the population. What changed about the politics that allowed Bloomberg to pursue the agenda he had, as contrary to, just following up Giuliani?
Well,
Sure.
There isn't any question that as a New Yorker who, we moved to Brooklyn in 1969. I grew up with Mayor Lindsay and Mayor Beam and Mayor Koch. I think there was, which young people in New York I don't think quite recognize, there was a really pent-up great desire for big change in the 1990s that, was nationwide, was exemplified by Bill Clinton's election. And it was a few that cash assistance without work was leading to more poverty and less good outcomes for children. And that built up, led to the remarkable election of Giuliani. And then, Mayor Bloomberg, I was different than Giuliani in many ways, on many policy fronts. He was more similar to Giuliani than some might have thought on welfare policy, because I think he believed in those expectations. So I even think now in the election of the new mayor, he was always talking about working people. affordable, helping working people get to work, make public transportation lower expensive. You don't use public transportation unless you're going to work. And childcare is for workers. And I think it's an entirely different approach from what was a kind of entitlement, rights-based dependency world of the progressive New York prior to Giuliani. And I'm gratified that it survived. Good for New York.
Let Stephen Banks get his licks
Yeah,
in here.
go ahead.
Yeah.
I've never been a potted plant, so I think I'll be okay. Look, rather than create the fireworks that I know everybody's waiting for, I'm going to take a slightly different tack. How's that? Which is, first of all, I thought the book is a very useful way to look at how to make change in public institutions. We can disagree about public assistance policy. One thing I will agree with you on is that New York City is constrained by federal and state rules. And so the changes that we were able to make during our 8 years were constrained by that. I thought the book was great, but I do want to get to some other metrics where you could look at how to make institutional change where you're not constrained by the federal and state limitations. But mostly, I think what is important, and you sort of alluded to this, is that when I looked at this public institution, remember I had been a legal aid lawyer for 33 years. I had sued primarily this agency for that 33 years. I know the book alludes to the day I got appointed that people were, you and others were saying that now there'll be 1 million people on public assistance. Meanwhile, the senior leadership of DSS and HRA were thinking now we're all out of jobs. But I looked at the way to make change was to look at people who had chosen to work in an agency, and people heard me talk about this a lot, people that chose to work in an agency that served people, and therefore engaging the leadership who chose of all agencies to work at the one that serves people, to engage them on how could we best serve people would be step one in making change as opposed to wiping them all out. And I think you talked about what happened at the Department of Homeless Services, where in fact a different approach was taken, and in fact the entire leadership was mostly wiped out. It took some period of time before the de Blasio administration adjusted to that issue, and then that led to the integration of DHS back into HRA, into DSS. But the second way I think I went about making change was to engage the frontline staff, not just the leadership. Because they're the people that the people interact with. Many of them are living in the same set of circumstances that the people who are coming to the agency are living in, and getting them to be embracing what kind of changes you make are really important. Let me illustrate just one particular change that it was so important to focus on the frontline staff. So I know, Jason, and you would appreciate this, but my first day at HRA as the commissioner, I wanted to meet with the staff all throughout the city and to talk about what my visions were for making some changes. I thought not just incremental change.
Yeah, okay.
And the first, I make my pitch, the first question I get is, after suing us for 33 years, what qualifies you to be the commissioner of this agency? Which I thought was a fair question, but the engagement of the frontline staff was always about sort of, I think the rest of that question was, and by the way, we know you're pro-client, but what about us? But part of being pro-client was also looking at the sort of inverse side of the client issues. And you and Jason may disagree with me, but I thought one of the immediate problems were case closings and sanctions, which the state was about to enact a huge penalty on New York City for having too many fair hearings challenging case closings and sanctions. Whether you thought that was a good policy or a bad policy, we were faced with millions of dollars of fines. So I had to figure out a way to eliminate that, and I said to myself, from a worker point of view, what good was it to close the case, sanction the case, and then have to reopen it or undo the sanction after the client wins the fair hearing? And the agency was losing fair hearing after fair hearing after fair hearing. So the pro-client of not closing the case and not sanctioning people was also pro-worker by reducing their workloads by not having to close and then reopen cases. basis. And that was sort of part of the approach on all of our reforms. What was going to help the staff do their job? Oh my goodness, it's also connected to what's going to help the clients have a better life. And the imperative of making this change was because Ellen Levine and her great research team, and Kinsey is here and others, helped me do one of the immediate studies that we did, which was to look at the association between case closings and sanctions and applying for shelter. And we found that there was a direct association between the numbers of people applying, between many of the numbers of people applying for shelter who were having their cases closed or sanctions. And we had to stop that if we were going to stop the influx of people into the shelter system. So to me, with respect to the book, that's non-incremental change, because what we did ultimately was reduce the number of fair hearings at the agency by 50%, and we reduced the numbers of people applying for shelter. Regardless of whether they became eligible, we dramatically reduced the number of people applying for shelter by reducing the sanctions and the case closings. And we avoided millions of dollars in penalties. So seems pretty significant.
Well,
you know?
let me say a little bit about that. So usually when I think, and it shows up in the book, when I think about change, I tend to think in terms of policy change, okay? So, however, there is a section in the book where I talk about organizational change, okay? And I do
You're
point...
complimentary in that part. I like that.
And there are, by the way, I think I'm complimentary all the way through. But at any rate, I try to be as complimentary as I can be and still be an academic, okay? So, but anyhow, organizationally, I see, two distinct ways of bringing about major change in bureaucracy. So, under Giuliani, now I think I don't mean, not only do I not mean this in a negative sense, but there's an entire book devoted to the thesis that Giuliani's greatness, if that's what it was, is because of his Machiavellianism, right? And he was a Machiavellian prince who was willing to use, evil logic to achieve his ends. Well, okay, so there's a biography that says that's good, right? Well, maybe, and that does seem to have been the way he approached HRA. It was a very tumultuous change. And as you know, I interviewed people at HRA, and I said, well, what was the the most dramatic period in your career at HRA? And they said, oh, it was under Giuliani, where they handed out a book. Jason, I think you handed out a book. Title of the book was First Break All the Rules. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Okay, and as a matter of fact, you did successfully shift the critical task of HRA from eligibility determination to to job attachment. That was no small task. Okay, that's one way to do it. All right. Thankfully, it turns out not to be the only way to do it. And I think that, Steve, you taught me that there is an alternative approach to organizational change. And I do my best to give due credit to that approach, which was all about building up internal consensus. And I think, as a matter of fact, I quote Giuliani as saying, my approach to change is, first of all, make the change, have everything up and going, and it's irreversible, and then you announce it, okay? Because then nobody can do anything about it. All right, that's one way. You didn't do it that way, okay? You built up consensus. Instead of approaching people as enemies to be defeated, you kind of brought them on board. And I think that's an equally valid approach to organizational change, and I think I give you due credit on that.
Yeah, the two of you agree that his analysis of the different styles of the mayor and what might they reap in the policy process?
Roberts are neutral on this.
Yeah.
Right,
I mean,
yeah,
I
okay.
think that there are definitely stylistic differences. There aren't any question about it. But it's still management. It's still showing up every day, holding people accountable, gathering them together, asking their input. It's not exactly true that the Giuliani management of HRA through Jason and his team, and including many people that are still there and enjoyed working there and were very, very supportive internal champions, weren't engaged in that. And there was a sense among job opportunity specialists and people in the job centers that the new way of doing business made more sense to them because that's what they were doing. They were getting up every morning in low-income communities and coming to work. And they didn't really understand why we couldn't ask and help people who were just like them do the same thing in return for public assistance. So I think it's a little, I definitely agree, and I want to credit Steve for implementing and instituting an effort to reduce the number of unnecessary sanctions and doing it in a way that still enforced the rules. And I think I compliment you on that. I would say that was a good thing. But I don't think that it's not true that there were management skills that weren't just, do it my way or the highway, that were deployed at HRA. Because I was the commissioner at the state level, and I would come down, and the state has a long history of thinking that nobody in New York City at HRA knows what they're doing, Republican or Democrat. And I would come down, and I would see an energetic, engaged senior leadership team going around to all of the various workstations, pulling people together, going over the data in a very intense way that I'm sorry to say doesn't always happen in city agencies that aren't well managed. And so maybe the style was different, maybe the philosophical input was different, but I do like good managers. I like people that show up and keep track and call people down and promote people.
I
that are
certainly
doing
don't
great
mean
work.
to imply that Giuliani was some kind of a wrecker, or something.
Well,
no, that's not the point.
You also
But-
have to understand the extent to which the mayor is not at HRA.
Yeah.
I mean, the commissioner's at HRA. Steve is at HRA. I was at HRA. Jason's at HRA. That's where the real management issues take place. So the great thing about both examples is that there were dedicated public servants who really cared about the outcome, who showed up every day and worked hard and listened to people. And I think that was true of both. Steve
So you're
and-
both. What I'm hearing here is there's certainly the factor of leadership, but what you're saying is that the nuts and bolts people of the agency, sometimes called bureaucrats, which is not fair, are the ones that really drive the policy and the accomplishments of the agency.
Not the policy, but the accomplishments, that's for sure.
Okay.
They're the ones that get it done.
Yeah,
Okay.
look, the frontline staff and the managers are the heart and soul. Jim Dumpson, who was a longtime commissioner of the agency, beloved, was someone that I knew very well after his post-HRA period, and he once said to me that he was riding down in the elevator at 250 Church Street, which was the headquarters then, and those days they had attendants in the elevator, and someone said, "You're the commissioner, right?" And he said, "Yeah." And the guy said to him, "Well, commissioners come and go, but we're still here." And I think that's true. And the ability to make change, though, is directly in proportion to the ability to engage the people who were here before you and will be here after you with ideas that animate them wanting to come to work and implement.
Well, let me just say, the person who taught me public administration was James Q. Wilson, who is a distinguished Harvard professor, and wrote a great book on, it's called Bureaucracy, What Government Agencies Do and Why They Do It, right?
Also affiliated with AEI.
That's right, yeah. So, I took his class on bureaucracy, okay, which that the book came out of. And the way I was taught public administration is that the organization is built on the tasks. First of all, he's emphasized tasks, not mission, but what people actually do, okay? So it's built on the tasks of the frontline workers. And he also taught me that there's nothing that's more difficult in reforming a bureaucracy than trying to shift the frontline tasks of the workers from one task to another, right? And to do that, you have to engage those workers, right? And I think that under Giuliani, there was a dramatic change in the frontline, the critical task, away from eligibility determination and to job attachment. And I think that under de Blasio, they stuck with the critical task of job placement, but they sort of won the staff over to a slightly different, or maybe substantially different approach to it. Okay, it's interesting. I interviewed some. Now, there weren't frontline staff at HRA. There were frontline staff at one of the nonprofit organizations that was actually delivering the career pathways programs. I think they might have been at Goodwill Industries. And I was interviewing one of the people there, and I said, well, what do you make of the change that happened under the de Blasio administration? And somebody blurted out, oh, under de Blasio, there's no more teeth in the system. So I said, whoa, holy man, wait a second, let me write that down. I got to do something with that. But then upon, when you probed a little bit, it turned out that that wasn't really what she was trying to say. She was trying to say something more like, we've discovered under de Blasio that, that there's still some teeth in the system, but that we have to have a less punitive approach to engaging clients.
I found your interviews very interesting because essentially, it's sort of like the idea. Steve Banks is the commissioner now. You got 1 million people on public assistance, and the conventional wisdom would have been, oh, the vendors are going to hate this approach. And in fact, most of them in the interviews were saying, oh, actually, we like this approach. We were trying to do it anyway.
Yeah, that's a big point.
But to Robert's point a little bit on this, the reality of being the DSS commissioner and the DSS senior staff and even a DSS frontline worker is you have federal and state rules that you have to implement. And your discretion is how you implement them. And whether you agree with the philosophy or not, whether I agree with Clinton welfare reform or not, and I have certainly lots of issues, our task was to figure out a way to implement that set of rules as defined by state law as well, that would be in a different way. And so if the non-incremental change is getting rid of the rules, there's a sense that would be a more satisfying non-incremental change, but you can't because you've got federal and state rules. To me, the non-incremental change at DSS during our time were the other programs that were created out of whole cloth that HRA or DSS had never done before. For example, the combination of paying rent arrears and providing lawyers to people drove down evictions from 2013 to 2019, pre-pandemic, drove down evictions by marshals by 41%. That's thousands of people that didn't get evicted. That's pretty non-incremental change, but it's in the area where we could write with our own hand. We weren't constrained by federal and state law. Or creating the Fair Fares program, where we created it without any state or federal rules, and we were able to put rapidly thousands of people given the ability to get on the trains. Or the ID NYC program, creating thousands and thousands of IDs for people. That was because HRA had the institutional ability to deliver those programs that they were created at HRA, and creating the change is giving HRA the ability to say, you know what, we can do things beyond what federal and state law requires to do and create whole new programs.
One thing I would caution one comment about the testimony or research you did with staff and with contractors. I found them to be extremely loyal to who's in charge. And I sometimes thought, which I was impressed by, because the politics of winning an election, you want to have people that say, well, I may not agree with this, but they won, and I want to help them do what they want to do. And that goes against the conservative criticism of bureaucrats generally. But I found that they had a kind of, don't take this wrong, Steve, but, the previous commissioner's dead, long live the new commissioner, And so I would just take a little grain of salt with that kind of testimony. And then on the contractors, you revealed something that was quite remarkable in that part of your book. Mayor Giuliani, largely due to the implementation of Jason Turner, totally changed the way we did job placement and employment services contracts in New York City from 40 and 35 politically connected, not entirely clean, not successful, not performance-based, not monitored contracts to 7 or 8 really highly qualified professional job services people. And you quoted them all: Maximus, America Works, Goodwill. And that was big change that happened that both Steve and I benefited from, because we could, in my opinion, execute with partners in the contracting world who were not overly influenced by patronage and political baggage.
Let me
Robert, if I may just follow up on that good comment, they were also paid for getting people jobs and retention instead of political connections, so politics was out.
Right, and so Steve could change it with professionals who would, okay, you want to do something different? We'll do that, but we're not going back to the old way. And so I would just, and then on top of that, I would just point out that the contractors, they're not dumb. You know, you talk to them, they're gonna be sure to, they're not gonna, they're gonna tell you.
All right.
Okay.
Well, let me say let me say a couple of things. First of all, I don't mean. Let me clarify. Don't necessarily mean to say that non-incremental change is good, incremental change is bad. You know, and the more non-incremental change we get, the better.
Incremental change is the key.
Yeah. Now, for instance, so let's take so there's incremental change and there's incremental change. So Steve makes a good point, right? So the idea of guaranteeing legal representation to defendants in housing court, well, in one sense, it's merely, if that's the way you want to put it, an incremental change, because you take was the institution of housing court dispensed with? No. Did we abandon adversarial proceedings? No. All we did is we made sure that both of the adversaries had equal representation. All right. So that's, strictly speaking, an incremental change. It didn't break a policy baseline, but that's one hell of an incremental change, right? And I think I say at the end of one of my chapters on homeless policy under de Blasio, something like, well, if you think that there's something bad about incremental change, then all I've got to say is that de Blasio and Banks managed to give incremental change a good name in their homeless policy. And I agree, non-incremental change and incremental change are like the yin and the yang of American politics. You have to have both. But you got to keep in mind, I was reacting against a literature that I absorbed when I was a graduate student. I remember when I took a class on, when I was a graduate student, on American social policy. And you had to read a book I had to read a book that was called, if I recall correctly, America's Misunderstood Welfare State. And the whole thesis of this book was, big change never happens in American welfare. Every once in a while, you have something like the Great Depression, right? Or you have the landslide victory of Lyndon Johnson. Then you get big change. Outside of episodes like that, doesn't happen, right? So upon reading that, I decided, okay, I'm going to dedicate my career to proving that this is incorrect, and I went hunting for non-incremental change, right? So I've got this propensity to look for and celebrate non-incremental change, especially, and there are various ways of doing it. I tend to be particularly interested in the role that ideas can play in it. But I don't mean to say there's something bad about incremental change, right? You need, but if you had nothing but non-incremental change, you would have chaos. Yeah? So that's the only point I want to make on it.
I'd like to change the focus of the conversation a little bit. This is a book about non-incremental change. So we're talking about dramatic changes in public policy that allowed each of you to do something different with an agency from what it had been doing before. And so what interests me as a political scientist, what changed in the political environment that allowed that to happen? And how much of it, where does mayoral leadership fit in? The mayor, you're working right under a particular mayor. who had very strong ideas about what they wanted to do. Part of it is they're interpreting a change in the environment and translating that into votes at some point, but also them explaining to the public what's changed and why we need to do things differently. How does that affect somebody running an agency? I mean, you came in with a new mandate, I assume. You came in saying, yeah, he's got it right, I want to do this. I assume you wouldn't have gone to work for the mayor you worked for if you didn't believe in what they wanted to do. Tell us a little bit about that, looking at it from the point of view of somebody running the agency.
Well, when I joined the Bloomberg administration halfway through, I came in the 5th year and served for the rest, it became clear when I was hired that, at least as it went with regard to the implementation of cash assistance, that one program, Mayor Bloomberg had decided that the direction toward work requirements and work requirement and work expectations and fraud protections was the right course. And he made it clear to me that he had bought into and agreed with the disenchantment with the progressive welfare rights philosophy that had preceded Giuliani. And he wanted me to know that he was not Giuliani on many things, but on that one, he was pretty strong. And so he was motivated by the consensus view, or the popular view, maybe not, every academic, but the strong view that the approach pre-Clinton welfare reform had not worked in reducing child poverty. And he wanted to get more focused on work and family, including child support enforcement. Then he also, I think partly from some influence from me and from others, became to understand that cash welfare, cash assistance, is not the same as SNAP. It's not the same as Medicaid. It's not the same as child care. And it's not the same as refundable tax credits that are tied to work. And where Giuliani was not, I think, enthusiastic about those, Bloomberg was. And so, but that also came from a political sense that, work requirements are fine, but if people go to work and they play by the rules, we should try to make those wages pay. And if the wages aren't enough, you should supplement those wages with supports. And I think that came from his sort of sense of the political environment and the influence of both federal and state policy. And so I think that's what motivated him. I would just say, again, my relationship with the mayor was, very, very hands-on. I mean, I met with him. We went over things. We looked at the numbers. He asked tough questions. But then once those conversations were over, we went out and implemented. And then, I would say one more thing. We have a mutual friend, the deputy mayor during the Bloomberg administration, Linda Gibbs, and she had a sort of a laboratory thing going on over at the mayor's office, that she could say, well, I'm doing this other thing, and I've got this Center on Economic, I can't remember what it was called, and she could say, look over here, we're experimenting with alternatives to Clinton work requirements that might make the more progressive or the more people that were less comfortable with that happy, but the mayor would say, Linda, you do that, that's good, well that's a little window dressing over here, but Robert, you keep doing what Mayor Giuliani asked you, started out. And so that was kind of the political dynamic, and it's hard to be mayor for 3 terms, and I think Mayor Bloomberg was a very successful mayor.
For the 3rd term, though. Didn't seem like he wanted to step down.
Yes, I know, but my point is that he did win 3 races, and he served out the full 12-year period, and there's always going to be a desire for change after that kind of length of service.
Steve, could you address this?
I mean, I think it's well known that Bill de Blasio and I have a long-standing relationship in many different respects. And
you ran against him, didn't you?
I did.
For what? For
a city council seat. A city council seat. As it was an open seat. It was a 6-person race. He came in first. I came in second. The other 4 people were born and raised in the district. The 2 of us were from Boston, so sort of an interesting issue about local politics. But he periodically would remind me that he had won the race, and I always used to tell him, if I had known I could have become the head of the Legal Aid Society, I never would have run for the city council, because that was the job I really wanted to be, which is head of the Legal Aid Society, which I was, and I think litigated against both of you in many different respects. But I think that he certainly came in, and I was interested in coming into government to address some of the things that we had seen as problems with the policy during the Giuliani and Bloomberg years, and we want to take a different approach. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to come into government, to be able to make changes that would benefit New Yorkers in a different way. I think one of the areas that Robert points out, that there was a common goal to try to get as many people as possible on SNAP food stamps, try to get as many people as possible on Medicaid. One of the interesting things about that, though, and it's not a criticism of you or of Michael Bloomberg or Bill de Blasio or myself, but when we look at these two programs, SNAP and Medicaid, getting people who are working into those programs is a reflection of a failing of capitalism, because those are compensating for the fact that their employers are not paying them a wage in which they can put food on the table and get health care for them and their families. And that's just the reality, that the taxpayers are subsidizing private employers. With that rubric, it's like what I said before. Rather than say we're going to not try to help people in those circumstances, both the Bloomberg administration and the de Blasio administration said we're going to get as many people as possible in a position, if they're when they're already working, to be able to enable them to put food on their tables and to be able to get access to Medicaid. And frankly, we use some of the same approaches in terms of making it easier to get those benefits. And that then cascaded over into getting cash assistance, which was to say, you know, the old model of delivering social services, you had to come into an office, right? And most of us used to do our banking by going into a bank. But all of us started to do our banking by sitting at our kitchen table and doing it remotely. So you said, and we said, why should people have to do that? Leave the centers to be open for the people that need extra help, and create as much as possible access off of handheld devices, which most people had, and that would promote access to cash, to food stamps and to Medicaid. Where we disagree is I promoted, and we did promote, access to cash assistance as well, but it didn't have the outcome of driving up the caseload like everyone predicted.
Right. We had a great, we had a line that I was proud of, which was "Don't stand in line, apply online." That worked well, and so we did start that, and you helped it going. And I would just say on the failure of capitalism, the way in which the work supports work is, instead of putting the burden of shoring up the compensation for work for low-income Americans entirely on the business, we all share in it through taxpayer-funded work supports. And I think, regardless of how you feel about that, it has worked, and it is what we have. And so I think we started making sure that it was effective. We were proud of the fact that the uninsured rate for children in New York City before Obamacare was less than 5%. And that was because, we understood these are different programs, and we want to help low-income working people get them.
Let me say something about mayoral leadership. Okay, so I'm working on a new book about the charter change of 1989, which eliminated the Board of Estimate, okay, among other things. And my theory of New York City politics is the distinctive thing about New York City government is this extraordinarily strong mayor. And yeah, I understand. I'll be told, yes, but New York City always had a strong mayor. Yeah, you had a strong mayor on paper in the sense that the mayor was independent of the city legislature, right? A weak mayor is a mayor that's on the legislature, right? New York City never had that, right? But you had this other entity, chimerical combination of, executive and legislative powers, the Board of Estimate, which really weakened the mayor, okay? And so after 1989, you had a greatly empowered mayor, right? And I think the genius of New York City politics is exactly that, the strength of the mayor, strong relative to the city council. Not that, by the way, I don't want a legislature that's a doormat. And as a matter of fact, the 1989 charter revisions empowered the city council even more than the mayor, really. The city council went from being a non-entity to something real. But the mayor...
But in the absence of a Board of Estimate, which was...
Right.
I mean, the council was supposed to fill that void.
Right. But anyhow, so you ended up with a city council that was empowered, a mayor that was empowered, but the mayor was a little bit stronger than the city council which I think is the way it should be. You want a strong executive. And I think you've both mentioned a couple of times that the mayor has these limitations. He really can't make changes because a lot of the policy is imposed on him or her. Ladies, one day it's going to be a her. Hang in there, okay? It almost happened with Catherine Garcia, who's now at the Port Authority. Okay, anyhow, so she landed on her feet. But the point is, I like a strong mayor, and I lament the fact that under the I think the problem is not so much capitalism, but the U.S. Constitution. That's my, bête noire. Because why? Because cities have no place in the U.S. Constitution. They're creatures of the state, and you end up with a mayor who I would say is very much constrained by the state, and to a considerable extent also by the federal government. And I would like to see a mayor that was fully empowered, more powerful than he is now. And gee whiz, Steve, I wonder what de Blasio would have done if he didn't have all of these policies imposed upon him and he wasn't really able to make the change. Now,
If he didn't have Andrew Cuomo.
well, yeah,
That's a
okay.
different question.
That would have been, but that
We
would
don't
have
have
been
any answer.
That would have been the really big change. Yeah, okay. But anyhow, so I wonder what the two of you think about this idea that New York City has got a really powerful mayor, and she ought to be even more powerful than we've got relative to the state and federal government.
I'm not sure I quite slice it that way. I think if you look at the way that the TANF program is run, it's sort of, you want the money, you have to have these conditions.
Yeah.
So if New York City had the ability to do that, which the federal government does, which is basically print money,
Yeah.
that would be an important power to have. Although I guess we
I don't
saw
want
what
to ha-
I
I
guess
don't
I
want
saw
Mayor to
we
have
saw
that
what
problem.
happened
Yeah, okay.
in
I
the
draw the line there.
1970s. So I agree with what your response is to that flippant comment of mine. But I think it's more so the limitations on New York City's powers vis-a-vis the state, and the ability of the federal government to condition federal funding that causes the constraints. And that's the reality of the situation versus some of the programs that I described tonight, and you allude to in the book as well, that we were able to make real change, which is where we had the total ability, and I don't know, real change is the wrong word, where we were able to make significant changes in addition to the changes you talked about us making, because we had a free hand to create new programs to be able to really impact people's lives. You know, it's interesting, and I just have to throw this in, one thing that has not come up, and we're 45 minutes in, is we ended the WEP program.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Which everyone thought the world would end if we ended WEP. You couldn't possibly comply with federal and state work requirements if you ended WEP. And it would also drive the caseload up. Actually, that wasn't a criticism you had. It was something other people criticized me. You were not on that one. But, you know, that's a pretty, I think, a tribute to the way that we implemented the changes, that we were able to eliminate this program that was highly controversial in terms of how clients viewed it, how the community viewed it, what the impact really was in terms of WEP, and it didn't have any impact on the caseload. and we were still able to comply with federal and state law in terms of connecting people to employment. WEP was the so-called work experience program in which people were required to work in city jobs for the value of their public assistance benefits. And the criticism of it was it didn't lead to real employment, and it was essentially the way to replace city headcount with free headcount. And the Parks Department was a place where this was particularly an issue, and eventually programs were developed to give people essentially wages to do that work. But it was seen as kind of the foundational piece, along with the contract with the vendors, to be able to comply with federal and state law in terms of work requirements. And we came in and said, we're going to eliminate this program, and we're going to eliminate it by replacing it with other work opportunities rather than this one. And we're actually able to create more paid work opportunities at city agencies to replace the unpaid requirement.
Okay, I'm
can
being
I just-
told that it's time to turn to the audience for some Q&A. Just
One
quick-
thing
quick.
about the mayor's power. First of all, the mayor of the city of New York is way more powerful than other mayors in the country.
Yeah.
And the fact that we have this state oversight, local administered, gives this mayor tremendous power, which is a good thing. And that's number one. Number two, given that there's this state oversight, locally administered, one thing you cover a little bit is this dynamic between the state commissioner and the city commissioner, or the mayor and the governor, which was problematic in the de Blasio period. And frankly, Pataki, Giuliani, despite the fact that they had political problems, the direction I received as the state commissioner was, you help the city and be cooperative and don't be, political and stupid. And that was a very successful partnership, as was Bloomberg Pataki too. So I would say that in New York, that's an important relationship. And in our time, Giuliani Pataki in HRA issues and Bloomberg Pataki was very successful.
Thank you. Why don't we give the people in the audience, who I would think have some thoughts on these issues, why don't we give you all an opportunity to ask questions?
Just raise your hand, I'll bring the mic to you.
How much time do we have left?
We can do another 15 minutes of Q&A,
Okay.
and then we'll...
Let's start with Jason.
She has the mic.
I've got the mic. My name's Laura Peck. I'm a professor at the Blasio School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University, and I'm really happy to be sitting nearby some other evidence junkies. And I have heard all of you share some tidbits of the role of data, research, evaluation, evidence in your in these episodes. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you used evidence and its influence on these outcomes.
The expert consensus was not around philosophy. The expert consensus grew because of methodology. It grew because there was, for the first time, rigorous research that converted people to the fact that we actually knew something worked. So it wasn't just a philosophical agreement on work first. It was hard-fought implementation of a major, major innovation in social science research, which was random controlled trials of work-first programs that showed they beat the alternative. And it is that evidence that basically drove that.
Okay, I have
Okay,
to,
let's try to keep the responses short so we give other people an opportunity to talk also. Go ahead.
well, very briefly, right? I think that one of the lessons of the book is that, yes, every once in a while, objective evidence manages to break through politics and actually make a difference in the lives of people who are not well off. And I could spout you a whole thing about that and go into political theory. I'm not going to do that. But I think one of the fact that that happens and that it importantly involves expert consensus is significant, and it's very unfortunate that the whole idea of expertise is now under attack in our political culture, it's always been not as valued in our political culture as in others, but now with the rise of populism and with the rise of social media, it's being flung down and danced upon, and I think that's a great danger.
So we kept informed through our various offices and in my own capacity on the evidence that was being developed around the country. We participated in gatherings to learn about those things, and we took lessons from them. But the thing you need to understand about the Department of Social Services in New York City is that it has access to more information about the people we care about than anybody else. And it's the most reliable information. It's not survey, it's administrative data. And so when I went from the operational role of HRA commissioner or the state role at OTDA, even there, I walked away from an enormous amount of day-to-day information and evidence about what was going on in the lives of New Yorkers. And I've been really frustrated ever since by joining the research community, because we don't always realize what advantage people in government that have access to the administrative data have on what's really going on in households. And so yeah, I mean, the operational data, we mined it. Jason said I have started JobStat. People looked at evidence and facts all the time, and that was an important way in which we could manage the agency.
Just a word of agreement with Robert on this, which is refreshing for everybody I know. Keep being a data junkie or a data nerd, whatever you want to call it. As Ellen and Kinsey will say, this was integral to making the changes that we made during our time. The ability to look at data, see what the trends were, and have the changes be responsive to the data. So yes, I wanted to reduce case closings and sanctions, but having data show that there was actually an association with a negative outcome changed the dynamic around, oh, it's just a good policy, we should do it, as opposed to it's an imperative to implement the policy, because look at the, leaving aside the human impact, look at the cost impact on city finances of that association. And I can go through dozens and dozens of examples like that, where real-time data analysis was associated and involved with policymaking.
It also led to internal competition between job centers.
Let Jason get in here for a second.
Really important.
Let's get somebody else.
Okay. I want to pick up on something Robert said and Steve said, and focus on that. When a welfare recipient, there's 3 stages a welfare recipient goes through. It's contemplating getting on and applying. It's the application process. And it's what she experienced during the period of time she's on cash assistance and how it helps her move forward in her life. Robert actually, I think, touched on something that's not as well understood as it could be. And I think Steve's decision to end WEP would have been benefited but would have been had a negative consequence over time. So when people applied for welfare under Giuliani, while their application was pending, they were obligated to look for work, and their application would not be approved unless they participated in job search. Once they got on, they were in WEP. So somebody contemplating getting on welfare, and this was throughout the community, was thinking, I'm going to go to work. So the question becomes, is that the where I want to work, or do I want to just get a job in the community? And when Giuliani came in 95, the Census Bureau said of mothers throughout the city who did not have a high school education, 17% were in the labor force, and when he left 18 years later, the Census Bureau reported that 47% of mothers without a high school education. So that's not HRA data, that's New York City data, and what it's reflecting is what people were thinking about before they decided to apply for welfare under the circumstances they found themselves in.
One thing I'd just like to respond on that. if WEP was essential to continuing to move the caseload down by connecting people to work whenever possible, removing it would have led to the caseload going up, and it did not. The caseload continued to go down, whether measured on a monthly basis or an annual basis. So we looked at the data to see what was happening when we made that change, and the prediction of the negative impact of that change did not occur.
You know, I'd like Michael Meyer to get a word in edgewise here, because I always value his yeah. Speak up, sir.
No, it's ridiculous. Yes. Thank you. I'm Michael Myers. I'm president of the New York Civil Rights Coalition. Stigma. There has always been stigma with respect to welfare recipients in New York for the longest time. I remember Blanche Bernstein. Oh my God, do I remember her? I think you remember her.
Okay.
Finally, she got out. Oh, she left. People who are on welfare have not had rights until George Wiley. Remember George Wiley, the father of Miss Wiley? He became a welfare rights organizer. He demanded, and the people demanded, that the welfare recipients be regarded as not recipients, but as people who had rights. And therefore, fair hearings changed. And people who are in law school, like myself, actually represented poor people to those commissions. And we started winning. We kept winning because groups like, I think it was COCASA or something, they published the law. They made it simple. They made it straightforward for advocates to come and say, you as a client have rights. You have constitutional rights. You have legal rights, state rights, city rights. And that changed the whole nature of the welfare system in New York. And I think we have to give credit to the welfare rights advocates and to the black people and the recipients of welfare who changed the policy long before you came in, Stephen. I mean, you did good. You did good. I remember commissioners who were not good. They were very bad. So my point is, to be brief, is that fair hearings, law students, lawyers changed the nature of our policy in New York. Even in terms of housing, people who were on welfare recipients, they were discriminated against. They couldn't get housing because they were on welfare. So the situation has changed now because everybody wants housing, everybody wants a hotel room. Well, it wasn't that the case in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Welfare recipients were discriminated against. And because of changes in society and attitudes about welfare recipients, thank God for George Wiley, I repeat, that's how we changed the system. Okay. More than the people who were the administrators.
Thank you, Michael. Responses?
So we'll just add one more question, and then probably that will be the last question, and you can respond.
Can I give a quick response? I actually agree with Michael's point, and one thing we didn't get to do was where did some of the ideas of the things we tried to implement come from? One of the first things I did was conduct essentially focus groups with clients of the agency to hear what they had to say, and Ellen and Kinsey will remember this well. When we made certain major policy changes, we actually surveyed the client population in addition to the frontline staff to hear what they thought would help them get a job, for example. So yes, and we were very cognizant of not having fair hearings that we were going to lose. Why make the client go through that if they were going to just win it?
Okay, one more question.
Yes. So, Tom, it seems to me, your book is about basically the implementation of welfare reform and how it looked in New York City, I would say. That was one description of your way. Yeah, okay. Next year marks the 30th anniversary of welfare reform, and it strikes me as that we're in a very different situation now than we were back in the 90s or the decades prior when the welfare reform debate kicked off. And one has to do with demographics. And when the welfare reform got going, back in the 70s and 80s, you were talking about actually big families. There's a famous book in the late 70s by Susan Sheehan called A Welfare Mother, single mom with 9 kids. Much rarer situation now. And actually, we have the opposite concern now, broadly speaking, with demographic decline. And one thing that's going on with that is that a lot of people have been rethinking whether or not benefits need to be, and I'm directing this question to Robert in particular, those people at the national level who set those conditions that Steve and Robert have talked about for New York City are having a debate about whether or not to get demographics up, we need to be more open-handed with regard to benefits, including people in the Trump administration. So whether or not those constraints will always be there, I think, is a question. And one other point is that we haven't mentioned this, but the caseload is way up in New York City right now. Okay, so it began late into Blasio under deep COVID, but it really soared under Adams. It's way up right now, and there's a lot of pessimism about the New York City economy right now, particularly its ability to provide jobs for working class people. In past years, you were able to keep going with welfare reform amidst economic turbulence. I'm not sure that it'll be as easy now.
Yeah, let me say what I think should be the next step in welfare reform. It turns out states are terribly misusing TANF funds, and there's a lot of corruption, as has been documented by the GAO in a report from September 2024. You have people like Brett Favre receiving millions of dollars in TANF funds in Mississippi to give inspirational speeches to welfare mothers. Well, okay, is that going to work? But anyhow, and there are people who are going around saying, you know what, TANF, because of that and other problems, like it's not counter-cyclical, and the amount we spend was pegged back in the 90s, people are talking about, gee whiz, maybe we should get rid of TANF and create a new program. And all I've got to say, if that happens, that'll be another example of non-incremental change in welfare policy and further prove my point that every once in a while we get non-incremental change in American welfare state.
It's remarkable in the history of American social policy that the TANF block grant was established in 1996 and hasn't changed, and the basic contours of the policy have remained in place, leading to, in that program, enormous savings. And yet, we've still continued to be able to make dramatic declines in child poverty and help people get out of poverty through a combination of work and work supports. So I think the consensus, and I've been in Washington every time, you know, an effort is made to bring TANF back or change TANF, and the consensus in the country is they don't want to, they like it, and it has been a success. And so I'm fine with that. On this new nationalism stuff, this comes up on the right, and what I say is, this sounds a little bit to me like you're concerned about white working class people who've had a hard economic time, and all of a sudden you want to give them things that you wouldn't give to single mothers in the cities. And I'm not going to stand for that. I'm going to hold people in different circumstances to the same rules and responsibilities that we held in welfare reform in New York City. So I don't think the answer to the demographic problem that we have is going to be a new cash benefit to people without conditions. And so I don't think that's the answer. I think it's more of a cultural problem and will be addressed that way.
Steve, why don't you close it?
Well, now to add a little gasoline to that fire, we've been so collegial through this whole thing. One thing we learned during COVID is when there were direct cash payments, it drove down child poverty. Just to put it out there. There was a significant reduction, and it sort of served the purpose of what public assistance is supposed to do, which is to address emergencies. That was an emergency, and it helped people meet their basic needs. And as we go through the current period, where basic entitlements like SNAP food stamps, that interestingly enough, both the Bloomberg administration and the de Blasio administration viewed it the same way. Medicaid, the same way. The same way we viewed these two programs, there's now significant national restrictions being placed on both, which is going to have profound implications for poverty across the country.
Thank you. We've run over. I'm getting looks over here that I need to move things along. So let me close by congratulating Tom on an excellent book and another excellent book, which will extend this conversation that you've been involved with for many years. And our two panelists who are here, who were generous enough to share their experience in running probably one of the toughest agencies anybody could ever take on. And thank you both.
Thanks, everyone. What we'll try to do is, there's a reception after that, so I understand there are a lot of questions and discussions that need to happen. So we still have time for that. We budgeted until 7:30, but again, we have the room. You can hang around if you want to. I would just like to thank everyone who helped organize the event. So Aronson Democracy Fund was one of our sponsors. Mark's School Events team, can we get a shout out for them? Dinah, Amanda Puck, and Mariana, the conference center staff. So I look forward to engaging with you guys again. And in the end, we wanted just a photo with all the 4 panelists and with a book in hand. Probably this is a book event. So, and Amanda will take a photo. And Jason, Jason, you can come on in. I have another book.